Hi everyone, it's Sandra from the Schwowin's Nest. Welcome to my Christmas series. If you haven't already subscribed to my channel, I'd love it if you could click that red button. Now let's get into crafting.
My first project is creating this Joy Christmas tree decor piece. It's on Wayfair for $80 on sale.
I'm starting off with some 2.5-inch by 3-inch wood blocks that I just cut with my miter saw. I'm going to take some stain that I've mixed up in a little bottle. I've got some gray and burnt umber together and some water, and then that just creates my custom rustic look stain. I'm going to give all of the blocks one good coat, making sure that everything is covered. I love being able to use acrylic paint and water to make my own custom stain. And when I use these little bottles from the Dollar Tree, it's really handy because then I don't have to mix it up every single time I want it. I grabbed some wood letters and some wooden snowflakes, and I'm just going to give them the same color stain as the blocks. Make sure your blocks are completely dry. I let these sit for a couple of hours because I want the glue to stick really well. I'm just using my Gorilla Glue gun with some regular hot glue sticks. That's totally enough to keep these all together. So I'm just going to go ahead and glue all 5 pieces together to make the stand. I'm adding the snowflakes to the first and the last block, and then I'm going to put the word joy on the 3 blocks on the inside, just like the inspiration piece. Now it's time to glue on the trees, again, just using hot glue. I decided to take some different colors, and some are sparkly and some have snow, just because I'm not going to be putting the lights on these trees, so I wanted them to kind of sparkle and glow in their own way. I'm starting off with the tallest tree in the center. I'm going to put 2 of the medium-sized trees on either side, and then a couple smaller ones on each end. I thought this tree was really nice and rustic. I know it's made from driftwood, which is really soft and smooth, but you could definitely replicate this with some branches from your backyard. $70? I don't think so. As I said, if you've got trees or branches in your backyard, you can definitely do this project. I had a lilac bush that needed some trimming anyway, so I went ahead and pulled some bigger branches and some smaller branches. I cut them into different lengths and grouped them in threes. So now what I'm doing here is just pulling out one from each grouping so I can paint that a different color. I'm going to paint these 3 different colors. One color, of course, is just going to be the natural wood, but this second color is just white. This is just regular latex paint. You can see I've got it in a big jug here, nothing fancy. You can use acrylic paint, chalk paint, anything you've got on hand. The next color I'm going to use is this one called Mushroom. It's sort of a cross between beige and gray. I think it is very similar to the Mineral Chalk Paint by Waverly. And I'm going to give my second set of branches this color. Again, just one coat and then set it aside to dry. The next step is to drill some holes into the center of each of the branches, making sure you go all the way through. I always like to put a scrap piece of 2x4 underneath my wood because I don't want to accidentally go through my table. The reason I'm doing this is because I'm going to be taking a dowel, fitting it through, so these are really nice and sturdy. I didn't think that plain hot glue would keep them together, so I figured if I used a dowel, then that would keep everything nice and sturdy. For the base of my tree, I decided to just use a spindle instead of a piece of birch, but you could do whatever you wanted. I drilled a hole in the spindle, added some hot glue as you see me doing here, and now I'm putting my dowel in, and that's going to hold everything nice and sturdy. Now I'm going to just start feeding the wood pieces right onto the dowel. The hole that I drilled is big enough that they'll easily slide right through. I'm also going to make sure that they're in a different direction each time I put them on, but because I'm not hot gluing them together, I'll be able to make adjustments later on. I am collaborating today with my very good friend Sonia over at Domestic Diva DIY. She is also doing some Look for Less, so when you're done watching my video, head on over to her channel. I'll leave the link to her video and her channel down in my description box. I got to the point where the wood pieces were getting too small to fit in this larger dowel, so I'm trimming it off, but I'm going to leave a little bit sticking out simply because I want this piece of wood to fit halfway into the larger dowel, and then I'm going to be pushing the smaller dowel in from the top. I'll use hot glue to hold everything in place. I continued adding the wood pieces that had holes drilled in them, but once I got to the ones that were too small to drill holes, I trimmed off the rest of the dowel and then just secured it in place with hot glue. Now I'm going to be taking the smaller pieces of wood and just hot gluing those together one on top of each other. I'm sorry that I'm kind of off screen here, but I think you can see a little bit of what I'm doing. I added a little pine cone to the top of the tree, and I'm really happy with how this tree turned out. Here's a look at this Wayfair version of these metal reindeer table decor. It's a piece of wood, it's 3 metal reindeer, and it's $76 on sale. Okay, so let me show you how I recreated this for about $2. I've got these wood reindeer that I cut out using a laser cutting machine. I've been playing around with one for a while, trying to get the hang of it. This is one of the projects that turned out really well. I gotta tell you, I've had some humdingers that didn't turn out. Anyway, I'm going to give it one coat of light gray paint, and I'm going to do the front, the back, the sides. Everything is going to get painted with this gray paint. The second step to make them look galvanized is to use some silver acrylic paint, and I'm using this makeup sponge, and as you can see here I am kind of turning it so it doesn't end up the same direction all the time, and that is a happy accident for me. I thought I was going to have to do many layers to get the look of the galvanized, but when I started using the makeup sponge I saw that I was getting those different angles and textures, and it really started to look. I have tried some other painting techniques for galvanizing, but I think this one turned out the best. So I'm going to keep this in my back pocket for future projects. To get the rust look for around the edges, I'm going to continue with the same makeup sponge, and I'm dipping it into some burnt umber and honey brown paint. And I want that to give it more of a realistic look because rust isn't all just one color. So I'm just kind of dipping my makeup sponge in those two colors and then kind of blending it together and then just going all the way around the edges of the reindeer. And it really starts to look good. I found this piece of wood in my stash. It's just a piece of pallet wood, and I'm going to do something a little different. I thought I would add some beads to the bottom of this wood just to raise it up a little bit more and make it look even better than the one from Wayfair. I'm using hot glue to glue the beads onto the pallet. I wanted to create a groove where the feet would sit on the wood. So I'm going to use my rotary tool and one of the carving tools and just carve out some little areas, sort of like little dashes in the wood. And that's going to allow me to set the reindeer feet right in there, and you won't even be able to see the glue. It's hard to see, but I do have all the grooves in there. I'm going to use my Starbond medium thickness glue. That's going to give me a little bit more working time, but it's not as bulky as hot glue. I'm just going to set the reindeer feet right into my little grooves and then give it a shot of the accelerator, which will harden the glue a lot faster. I'll do the other two reindeer the same way, adding my Starbond glue, putting them in place, and then giving them a shot of the accelerator. If you're interested in trying out any of the Starbond products, I have a link and a discount code for you down in my description box, so make sure you go check that out. They're really handy glues to have. I don't use them all the time on all of my projects, but there are some specific times when I do use them. Out of all the projects I'm doing today, I've got to say that this one is my absolute favorite.
This first project, I think, will probably be my favorite out of all of them today. And I used my xTool M1 Ultra machine to cut out all of these Christmas tree shapes. And I'd like to say thanks to xTool for sponsoring today's video. They did send me my laser engraving and cutting machine, and I'm going to show you a little bit more about that later. But first, let's take a look at what I'm doing to these trees. The first thing I did was use my mister and I spritzed them with a little bit of water, and that's just going to give me the ability to take all the paint that I want and create a stain out of it. So you can still see a little bit of the wood grain showing through. I decided to stain all of these, but you could definitely paint them with better colors, darker colors. Maybe some green would be really nice if you had 4 or 5 different tones of green. I think that would look beautiful too. But do whatever speaks to you. These are just inspiration videos for you and to help you decide what kind of crafts you'd like to create for your holiday decor this season. This is a thrift store find. I am always on the lookout for these types of signs. I don't use the sign itself. I flip them over and they turn into this beautiful rustic frame. I don't mind that you can see the staples in the corners. I think that adds to the character of it. This one was $4.99. I actually got 2 of them. The second one is serving as a little tray for all of my coffee bar essentials on my counter. So that's an idea there for you too. You can use these as trays. You could even put some handles on the side and it would look gorgeous as a tray on your coffee table, on your counter, or even on your dining table. Off camera, I laid out a pattern so I knew exactly what I wanted to do with these trees, and now it's just a matter of using some hot glue and placing them down onto the tray. For the second layer of trees, I wanted them to be elevated a little bit. So I grabbed these buttons that I had in my stash. I'll never use this color of blue. And I'm going to glue 2 on each of the bottom Christmas trees. And then that will just lift up the second tree a little bit more. Now, you won't be able to see this blue color, so don't worry about that. But you don't have to use buttons. You can use absolutely anything that you have in your stash. Maybe even just some tiny little wood scraps would work great too. For the third layer of trees, I did have to resort to using some beads from my stash because the buttons, I think there's like a pile of 6 buttons here on this bottom tree. And I thought, well, let's just go grab some beads or something else that'll just fill up that space a little bit quicker than having to glue on all of those buttons. I got my inspiration for this piece from this 7-piece wooden Christmas trees on a base that are available on Wayfair for $82. That's 82 Canadian. And I think I did this one a little bit better. I think I took it to the next level, adding all of these trees and putting it on this frame. What do you think of this? Using the same 1/4-inch plywood, I cut out 2 sets of these reindeer, one 4 inches and one 6 inches. And this is a dupe for this crate and barrel reindeer set. These are zinc, but I think the wood looks just as good. Gluing 2 of these together will make it a 1/2-inch piece, and that will allow it to stand on its own. I'm using Weld Bond glue to glue these together. I'm going to use these small Dollar Tree clamps to hold it in place until the glue dries, and then I'll very simply paint them black. This is one of the main reasons why I wanted a 20-watt laser, so I could create all of these chunky designs and use them as decor in my home. I love the fact that they can stand on their own. Project number 1 is probably the easiest of everything that I'm going to show you today. I was lucky enough to find this wooden Christmas tree at a thrift store. It did cost me $7.99. It's missing the top. You can see there I pointed out the little hole, so the star or whatever piece was supposed to be on the top is missing. But I have this wood finial, and I thought, you know what? This is going to be a perfect topper for the tree. It fits in there absolutely perfectly, and I'm just going to use hot glue to hold it in place. For the base of the tree, I used black and burnt umber mixed together with a little bit of water to make my own stain. I'm going to brush that on and then wipe off the excess. This is the tree that I'm duping today. It is from West Elm, and one is $68. That's crazy. Now, I know my shape is a little bit different, but I love it just the same. Project number 2 is using this pine. This I got at my local Dollarama store a few years ago. Sometimes they still have it, but it's so nice and soft, and I love the texture of it, and the branches are really nice and thick. I'm pulling everything off the stems because I don't need them. I'm using a piece of soft floral foam, and this is what I am trying to recreate, a 6-inch artificial Christmas soft touch pine orb. By the holiday aisle, it's Wayfair. It's $83 just for the greens, not the pot, just the greens. Really? Oh my gosh. The prices out there are absolutely scandalous. So all I have to do is poke these into the floral foam, keeping a nice rounded shape at the top. So I'm using the longer pieces on the top. I'll switch to some of the shorter pieces down on the sides and towards the bottom. And then all I have to do is poke it into this ceramic canister that I got from the thrift store for $4. And for about $7, I have a beautiful little Christmas display. I never really thought about using pine in this way. So I really love the look of this, and I think it's going to be gorgeous for the holiday season. Now, all I have to do is just squish the floral foam right into the top of this sort of vintage canister that I found, and then add a few pine cones. And I'm just going to stick the pine cones in. I'm not even going to use any hot glue. As I get older, I have been wanting to do more easier things for Christmas. I don't do a whole lot of decorating, but I just love the look of this naturally rustic decor piece. The pine cones and the pine branches are just so pretty, and it's a really nice look for the holidays. Let me know what you think. Okay, let's get into project number 3. I'm using some of these lavender leaves, and I have a couple of other stems from the Dollar Tree that have the same type of leaves, but they're pointed and they're a little bit smaller. So I'm just going to use my little tiny detail scissors and cut a rounded edge to get rid of that point. This is the look that I am trying to recreate. They're faux mistletoe trees. They're a set of 2, and they're from Pottery Barn, on sale for $71. The first thing I'm going to do is to create all of my little branches. So I have some real branches from outdoors in the fall. We had some cleanup we did in the backyard, and then I saved some of these little branches, and they're perfect size. I'm also using some little red pip berries. I didn't have round berries, so I had to just make do with what I had because there was no way I was going to the store to spend more money. I'm going to put the little berry on the end of the branch, and then I'm going to add the leaves. I'm placing the leaves underneath the berry because that's what the inspiration looked like. Eventually, I end up putting the leaves on the top so they droop down a little bit more, but I had a really nice assortment of some that were just sticking straight out like this one, and some of them drooping down. These were really easy to do, but they did take some time. So if you're going to recreate this project, throw on a YouTube video, maybe my Christmas playlist, listen and enjoy, and just take your time to create these little stems. I grabbed another one of my sticks that I always keep in my craft room. They're nice and dry, so they work perfectly. I had carved out just a little bit of a hole in this wood coaster using some hot glue. I just added the stem in there and held it until it was all set up. Now it's time to add the branches to the tree, and using my inspiration from the Pottery Barn site, I just kind of did what it looked like. I did have to do a little bit of trimming on some of the branches just to make them a little bit shorter. And again, holding them in place at the angle that I wanted until the hot glue was dry. And this is how it turned out. For my last project, I am making a wreath. I don't make wreaths very often because they are kind of big and bulky to store, and I've only got so much room in my house. But when I saw this one on Wayfair, I fell in love. I love the jingle bells, the rusty, crusty kind of look to it, and it's just, I don't know, it just makes my heart happy to see this one. I'm going to be using some of these small zip ties or cable ties, whatever you want to call them. And that's what I'm going to use to attach all of the branches to this wreath. At the end, you won't see them because I'm going to cover them up with some of the greens. I really like the look of the lighter green in this wreath. So I looked through my stash of greens and I did find some that are a lighter green rather than the normal dark green pine that you get. These are some juniper branches and they do have a little sparkling of snow on them, but that's okay because I'm making a Christmas wreath and I don't mind this type of sparkle. I just don't like all the really heavy glitter. I'm going to be putting them on the wreath form, going in the same direction because that is what the inspiration piece looked like too. Then I used a little bit of another type of pine because I ran out of the juniper. I used that to fill in some of the spots that were sparse. And now I'm just cutting that pine down and just going around where all of the cable ties are so you can't see them. Hot glue holds all of this in place really well. To work on all of the stuff that I needed for my wreath, I had to think outside the box. The wreath had some tan and sort of beige colored berries. I didn't have any of those, and I didn't want to paint some of my red berries because a lot of times the red can come through and then you still see it. So I looked through my stash and decided to think outside the box. And I'm using some of these little wood beads. I'm throwing them into a jar with some of my honey brown paint, which is sort of a really muted orange color. And that is what I'm going to be using for some of these beads. I'm going to just dip them in there and then I'm putting them on a paper towel and I'm going to wipe them off and then they'll be stained a really pretty tan color. I already have some different sizes of rusty jingle bells that I made last year, but I needed to do these three big ones. So I'm just using this burnt umber paint, which I've been using quite a bit in my crafts this year. And for some reason, this one has a really sort of reddish brown tint to it. So using this kitchen sponge, I'm going to just dab it onto the silver jingle bells and then set them aside to dry. Once they were almost dry, I sprinkled them with some cinnamon to just mimic the look of rust. And the smell is really great too. Next, I grabbed three of these sort of wonky primitive stars, and I'm going to do the same thing with them. I'm going to dab on the burnt umber paint, but I'm not going to make it solid. I want to see a little bit of that light wood peeking through as well. And then I'll add cinnamon to these too. Now it's time to put everything together, and to make it a little bit easier to add things to the wreath, I'm putting the beads and the jingle bells onto these little branches. This is something that was on an older wreath that I had, and it was just like wound around. So there's a nice curve and arc in all of these branches, and I thought that would be perfect. Using a little dab of hot glue helps to keep everything in place. And I was surprised how good these turned out. They actually look like berries and not beads. Now it's time to assemble all the pieces together onto the wreath. And what I like to do is take each of the pieces and lay them out ahead of time. And then I know exactly where I want to put them. And putting the beads and the jingle bells onto a stem made it so much easier to use hot glue to put it together. I added the larger pine cones towards the center of the wreath. Then I added some smaller pine cones more on the outside. Now the stars, I think they really made this piece. I'm going to put one on the top and then two on either side. And I think these really added a lot of character and primitive to this wreath. The jingle bells, I'm going to be using some torn strips of fabric. I did not have anything plaid that I wanted to use, so I ripped up these little pieces. They're beige and it's sort of a Nordic stripe look to it. Just created a shoestring bow and glued it onto the large jingle bell, and then those will in turn get glued onto the wreath. I just love how this wreath turned out. It is naturally rustic. It has a little primitive look to it, and it sure as heck did not cost me $83. Let me know what you think of this one.
Every year, I try to make at least one pine cone tree, and today's the day for this one. I'm using the box from the Dollar Tree Christmas tree, and I'm just cutting one of the corners out. I'm going to use this to create a cone for my Christmas tree. Starting from one of the short ends and making sure that the red was on the inside, I just started to roll it until I got the cone shape that I wanted. I used some hot glue to hold it all together, but first I grabbed my stapler and just stapled it in a couple of spots to hold it so I wouldn't have to hang onto it while my hot glue gun warmed up. Using my scissors, I simply cut off the excess, and all I do to make sure that it is straight is I kind of just keep bending it in different directions until I see all of those little points are gone. And then if you have to just adjust a little bit more, you just keep trimming it until it sits the way you need it to be. I'm just using my hot glue gun on the lower temperature because I found when I had it on the high temperature, the glue took a really long time to set up. It was just that hot and was too liquidy. But what I'm going to do is leave about an inch of space in between each of the pine cones, starting at the bottom and going all the way around. For the second row, I'm going to then do the same thing, leaving about 3/4 of an inch of space in between each of the pine cones, and I'm going to stagger them. Basically, wherever there is a gap in the first row, I'm going to be putting the pine cone above that for the second row. And then I'll repeat those steps all the way up the cone, gradually getting smaller pine cones as I go. Here's the completed tree so far. I'm going to be taking one more pine cone and I'm going to set it on top of the 2 pine cones that I have there, and that will become the tree topper.
The inspiration for this tree came from the Pottery Barn Pine Cone Christmas trees. They start at $79 and go up from there. Now I'm adding a little bit of extra greenery to mine because I didn't have that many pine cones. But next I'm going to show you my second pine cone tree that I've made that has more pine cones in it and looks a little bit more like these inspiration trees.
This is something that I picked up at Michael's last year. It is part of my stash and actually the things that I usually decorate around the house with, but I've started to just pull some of those pieces into my craft projects as well. I'll continue adding the greenery, and as I get towards the top of the cone, I will be cutting the greenery sprigs a little bit smaller, not quite into thirds, but maybe into like sort of thirds. I don't know. It's hard to describe, but I didn't want any of the greenery to be sticking out further than the pine cones. So that's kind of what I was using as my measurement. The final embellishment on this tree is going to be some red berries. I love using red berries. I never used to be a red Christmas person. I was always into the silvers and purples and teals. And since I started my YouTube channel, I've been more into the rustic farmhouse look. So I'm really excited to have this tree as part of my decor this year. So I'm going to just wire 6 of these little berries together, add a lot of hot glue, and then I'm just going to push them into the space. And I don't want them sticking out either. I'm going to give them a good shove so they get right in between the pine cones and the greenery sprigs, so it's just nestled in there really well. And this also helps to make a project like this look more high end. If you don't have any gaps or anything hanging out, then it definitely looks like it's been well made. Here's how this 4th tree turned out. I think it's beautiful too, and I don't know which one is my favorite. I saw this beautiful setup of these bottle brush trees on a long wood plank. And I thought, you know what, that would be so beautiful to create, but also very simple, easy, and inexpensive to create. It was online at the Linen Chest for $90, on sale for 63. The first thing to do was gather my collection of bottle brush trees. And you guys know that you can find them at dollar stores. But if you're having a hard time finding different styles and colors, there is a really wonderful set that I have on my Amazon store. This is what it looks like. And I'll leave the link for you down in my description box. You get 30 pieces in different sizes, and you can also select from different colors. The trees that I have, some of them have longer wire stems, some of them don't. They have them right close up to the branches, but all I'm going to do is unscrew all the little wooden discs and then trim them down. Next, I got out my rotary tool and I added a regular drill bit into it, which fit perfectly. And the reason I'm doing this is some of the bottle brush trees had that white plastic mound of snow at the bottom. You've probably seen that as well. I needed to take that off and then drill a hole into these little slices that you can get from the Dollar Tree as well. And that gave me the opportunity to be able to take the little wire piece of each of the trees and hot glue it right inside the hole. I found the perfect piece of wood to use for this project. I had it in my stash. And next, all that's left to do is to hot glue the trees right onto it. I've got them arranged to look a little bit like the inspiration picture, some little varying heights and different colors. And I think this turned out absolutely beautiful for only about $5. I love this craft. This is the inspiration that is for my next project. It is a Christmas ornament, a little frame, $93. OMG, are you kidding me? I don't care who painted that, who the artist is. There's no way you need to spend $93 on a Christmas ornament. What you see me doing here is adding some tape to a piece of rice paper, and I'm taping it to just a regular piece of printer paper. I'm going to then run that through my printer with this cute little graphic that I got off of Creative Fabrica. I'm using one of these small plastic frames that come from the Dollar Tree, and they do look like they're a wood grain. Now I'm just going to cut out my little snowman guy, and I sized him to the size of the frame that it needs to go in. I'm also going to use the paper on the back just to give it a little bit more substance. So I'll just make sure that it fits and simply just put the backing right into the frame. I'm using some burnt umber and one of my little chip brushes to dry brush onto the frame. I want that faux wood grain to peek through, but I want the frame to be a little bit darker like the inspiration. This turned out so stinking cute. I didn't put a hanger on it because I think this will be a little too big for my tree, but I think it looks beautiful just standing on the shelf. This inspirational piece is absolutely gorgeous, and I know it's a canister, so it would have cost them quite a bit just to get the actual beautiful canister itself and then put the image on. I have an Etsy shop myself. I know how much time it takes, but I still wouldn't pay $65 for something like this, and I would never expect anybody else to pay $65 for something like this. As you can see, I started off with one of these big jars. I had a white canister in my stash somewhere, but for the life of me, I couldn't find it. So I thought, you know what? I'll just make do with this one. So what I'm doing is putting some tape on it because I thought I was going to just have some of the glass showing through. But at the end, I ended up going all the way to the top and just leaving a tiny portion of glass at the bottom and at the top. I'm giving it one coat of a clear matte spray with Rust-Oleum just so the chalk paint can stick better to the glass. Now that the sealer is dry, you can see that it takes on a frosty look. So if you ever wanted to do some type of etching, this would be a perfect spray to use. I'm using some chalk paint in white Adirondack. I believe it's from Folk Art. And I'm using one of my Stallmaster brushes. I love these. I have 3 of them. They are my favorite to use simply because they clean up so easily just by running water over them, and the paint slides right off the bristles and give a beautiful finish to your projects. I have all of these listed in my Amazon store. I created the graphic that was on the inspiration piece. I did this in Canva and then printed it off on a piece of tissue paper. I'm going to cut it fairly close to the edge of the image because I don't want any extra hanging out on the canister. This will be available in my Etsy shop as a digital download. I'm going to use Mod Podge to apply the tissue paper image to the canister. And I'm only going to be putting the Mod Podge on the canister and under the image. I'm not going to be brushing the Mod Podge on top of my image because there's a lot of black ink on it and I don't want it to smudge. To seal it up, I'm going to take my matte Rust-Oleum sealer again and just give it a quick spray when I'm done. I'm going to use my fingers to just gently rub over the image, tapping it and making sure I get all of the bubbles and creases out. You could also use a soft cloth or a tissue to dab because sometimes the oils from your fingers can also smudge the ink. Altogether, I think this would have cost me about $15. I did have the jar in my stash, but I checked online and these jars usually go for about $15. I have the paint, I have the tissue paper, I have the printer, so that didn't cost me anything. I love how this turned out, and I dressed it up a little bit with a ribbon to make it look more festive. This last inspiration isn't that expensive, but I hadn't done any snowmen at all this year, so I decided to do something with this one. Now, I don't have any styrofoam balls, and the only balls I had were these ornaments. So I'm just very carefully taking some needle nose pliers and pulling off the little piece at the top. I want this to be as flat as possible. I needed to use something as the base of the snowman so it could stand on its own. So I grabbed one of these mason jar lids, and you can see that there's a whole bunch of this that is sticking out. So I'm going to take a marker, I'm going to mark where it needs to get cut, and then I'm going to use my rotary tool with the saw cutting blade, and I'm just going to cut this right off. It came off so easy. Now, this is a plastic bulb. I would not suggest doing this with anything other than plastic. Maybe you could do it with a metal ball, but definitely not with glass. I'm going to use a pretty good amount of hot glue to glue these two together. Now I'm going to use hot glue, and I'm going to have to hold it in place until the glue sets up because there's not a lot of contact surface. And I didn't mention before, but all of these ornaments are different sizes. So the one at the bottom is large, and then I have a medium one and a small one. To make this little snowman look like he's ceramic, I'm actually going to be adding some clay, and that will help me to build up the sections in between the ornaments so it doesn't look quite so skinny in the neck and the body of the snowman. So I'm just going to be rolling out thin pieces of clay. They don't have to be very thick at all. I think I went down to about 1/8 of an inch. And then I'm just very gently going to be starting to press it onto the ornaments and fill it all up till I get to the top. Using my fingers, I'm just going to very gently press down any of the creases until I get this sticking on there. And with that mason jar lid at the bottom, it gave it a really nice base to stick to because the mason jar has some ridges on it. So you just have to take your time and be very careful not to push too hard. You don't want to crack your ornaments. If you want to recreate this project, I would definitely suggest getting some styrofoam or foam balls because that will just make it so much easier to work with. For the spaces in between the ornaments, I made sure not to push the clay in too far because I still wanted this to have a nice snowman shape. I waited 24 hours for the clay to harden and dry, and now I'm taking the sanding disc of my rotary tool and sanding off any of the bigger bumps. I don't mind if there's some bumps in there because that will just give me some extra texture, although the inspiration is ceramic, so it's really nice and smooth. But I'm okay with that. I like having little lumps and bumps because then it looks like a real snowman. The sanding tool is very easy to use. You just have to be careful that you don't press too hard because you don't want to take off too much of the clay. The inspiration piece didn't have a lot of embellishments, but it did have a little nose and 3 little buttons. So I'm taking this 1/2-inch dowel and I'm using my miter shears just to cut a chunk off of it. Then I'm going to get over to my rotary tool again, and I'm going to use the sanding disc again to create somewhat of a point on this little piece. I'm going to hold it with my needle nose pliers and then just keep sanding down until I get the look that I'm going for my snowman's nose. Here you can see the angle that I'm already getting just by using the rotary sanding tool. Here's the final shape, and I think it turned out really good. I'm using 3 little wooden beads for the buttons, and so I'm just adding some of this drywall compound just onto the one end of the bead so it looks like there isn't a hole. I used hot glue to add the nose and the buttons to the snowman, and once they were completely dry, I gave them a couple of coats of white chalk paint using a tiny little brush. Although this snowman took me a little bit longer than I anticipated, I still think he turned out absolutely adorable. You'll have to let me know what you think of my snowman. I hope my projects today inspired you to create some of your own looks for less. Make sure you head on down to the description box to see all of the links I have available for you, and don't forget to click on Sonia's channel links and her video. You're definitely going to want to see what she's created for our collab. Thank you so much for spending some of your time with me today. I truly appreciate it. See you in the next one.